I don't know. I don't know what to say about it beyond it's something you can get virtually everywhere in mainstream news, including from Barry Weiss back when she was at the New York Times and doing the exact same shit. The notion that this kind of coverage is brave or unheard of in like mainstream liberal resources is so stupid. I'm going to Barry Weiss for now, and then we'll watch when the Zoran stuff happens.
We're going to dive.
HBO did a thing on Barry Weiss, finally, Bovine Barry. And I'm very excited to report that, John is still with it, okay? He's still doing the damn thing.
Straight in with our main story tonight, which concerns CBS News, one of the most trusted names, Rogan. And if you're thinking, wow, that's not a very ideologically broad from and to, you're starting to catch on, because there are times where she's a little more explicit about what she believes, like when she gave a speech to the Conservative Federalist Society featuring this fun joke.
I am a gay woman who is moderately pro-choice. I know that there are some people in this room who don't believe that my marriage should have been legal. And that's okay, because we're all Americans who want lower taxes.
Good one. And you can almost hear that room unclench after she basically says, I know you think I deserve fewer rights, but don't worry, besties, we're still chill. And while that is obviously framed as a joke, it's also a setup to her saying in all seriousness, I am here because I know that in the fight for the West, who my allies really are, and she goes on to say, among other things, the wave of so-called progressive prosecutors has proven to be an immensely bad thing for law and order. And I've got to say, for someone whose claims they are politically homeless, she sure seems awfully at home in that room. And look, this isn't the first time an outsider billionaire has tried thumbing the scale of a news organisation. We've seen Jeff Bezos increasingly meddle with the Washington Post and Patrick Soon-Shiong do the same at the LA Times. But this feels like the most sweeping change yet, and at one of the few remaining prestige names in news. And if one person has suddenly been handed this much power over a whole news organisation, it is worth knowing who that one person is. So tonight, let's take a look at Barry Weiss. And let's start with the fact that she's been given editorial control of a massive news organisation, even though she's never run a TV network, has no experience directing television coverage, and as one 60 Minutes producer pointed out, is not even a reporter. That is true. She didn't come up through the news side of a newspaper, but through the opinion pages, which are a very different thing. She really made a name for herself after she was hired by the op-ed page for the New York Times in 2017. And to hear her tell it, it was for a pretty...
To put it bluntly, I was brought in, along with Bret Stephens from the Wall Street Journal, as a kind of intellectual diversity hire. My job, explicitly, was to bring in voices that wouldn't otherwise naturally appear in the New York Times, either because other editors wouldn't think to commit.
Yeah, like, having a pro-Israel position or talking about how college campuses are too woke or presenting yourself as like, a lesbian and therefore you automatically champion social justice causes while simultaneously taking a very strong pro-billionaire stance. These are obviously things that the New York Times never reports on. Who could forget the incredible reporting from Barry Weiss at the New York Times titled The Intellectual Dark Web, where she featured Dave Rubin, Ben Shapiro, Joe Rogan, and both of the Weinstein brothers as the champions, and Jordan Peterson, as the champions of intelligentsia. Yeah, pro-cop, anti-Zoran. These are positions that you can never find in mainstream news. Thank God someone is championing these causes that no one seems to talk about.
Them, or the writers themselves would think, the New York Times would never accept me.
Yeah, she was apparently tasked with finding voices that the Times op-ed page would never accept, which is already a big claim, given that before she got hired there, it published op-eds from, and this is true, Muammar Gaddafi and Vladimir Putin. If the Times had been around in the 15th century, I'm guessing it would have given an opinion piece to Vlad the Impaler. Drinking the blood of my enemies isn't disgusting, it's beautiful and courageous.
I'm conflicted, okay? Unnecessary shade for Gaddafi here, but also simultaneously maximum shade for Vlad the Impaler. And as an Ottoman son, I do agree with the Vlad the Impaler shade. I have to... It's hard for me to remove my own Ottoman bias from this equation, okay?
In any case, Weiss started getting attention at the Times for writing provocative pieces like this one, in which he argued that the left had gone too far in policing cultural appropriation. This one, a largely sympathetic profile of the intellectual dark web, a term that she popularised for people like Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro. And this one, suggesting progressives were so focused on labelling fellow Americans fascists, they missed opportunities to call out real fascism, which is just some weapons-grade whataboutism. That piece, by the way, also got attention for the fact that Weiss linked to posts from the official Antifa Twitter account. There was actually a well-known hoax site, which is pretty embarrassing. You don't expect a Times writer to fall for online hoaxes like they're your 75-year-old aunt on Facebook who keeps posting that message.
It's just crazy because, like, I don't understand how there was no editorial control on this, because as someone who has written an opinion editorial for the New York Times, they go up and down every minutia, every detail 1,000 times over to make sure that everything is like hyperlinked and everything is like accurate. So I don't know how she was able to just get that past the filters and the editorial team.
Saying, I hereby state that I do not give my permission to use any of my personal data or photos. That is fake, Linda. Also, why would anybody steal your photos? You exclusively post pictures of your elderly cat. You're going to be fine. But things came to a head in 2020 after the Times ran this infamous Tom Cotton op-ed in which he argued that the US should send federal troops into cities to tamp down protests against police violence. A lot of staffers at the Times argued that it shouldn't have published that editorial, and Barry Weiss wrote a series of tweets about a supposedly heated staff meeting, characterising it as a civil war between the mostly young wokes and the mostly 40 and up liberals. That claim was strongly disputed by others at the paper, with one editor saying, I'm in the same meeting that Barry appears to be live tweeting. This is inaccurate in both characterisations. It's not a civil war, it's an editorial conversation, and it's not breaking down along generational lines. So, to be fair, it seems Barry Weiss does have some reporting experience, specifically trying to report what was happening in a meeting, only to have her own co-worker say, hey, what the are you talking about? Now, shortly after that, she resigned, posting a lengthy resignation letter to her website, claiming that her forays into wrongthink had made her the subject of constant bullying by colleagues who disagree with my...
Yeah, she was trying to get fired. She was actively trying to get fired from the New York Times, and they just wouldn't fire her because you can be as annoying as you want in the right-wing direction. The New York Times is never going to fire you for that. As a matter of fact, the New York Times loves that they have someone like Barry Weiss on board. So they just would not fire her. So she basically self-canceled and then complained about how she was actually quitting the New York Times because people were being really mean to her, okay? She wanted to, at the heat of like cancel culture, anti-cancel culture attention, she wanted to basically get fired from the New York Times so she could build a robust career for her as a formerly canceled person. And it just wouldn't happen. So she engaged in the opposite of quiet quitting, loud quitting, self-canceled, still did that shit anyway.
Views, and she now tells the story of that letter in some pretty self-mythologizing terms.
I thought to myself, I have a choice to make. I can stay. And in where I lived on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, Seinfeld territory, telling people you worked at the New York Times really meant something. Got you a good table at a good restaurant, among other things. And it meant a lot to me because I felt like, wow, like I made it. Or I could leave and I could give up the prestige, give up the platform, have no plan for what I'm doing next, but leave with my integrity. So I left with a resignation letter, sort of heard round the world.
Oh my Lord. Lordy, what a... Oh... just so invested in the self-suck. You can tell people don't die from self-suck, okay? I'm here to tell you the truth. Nobody has ever died from self-sucking. Because obviously, if someone were to pass away from self-suck, this would be the moment. Because I've never seen levels of self-suck this hard. Oh, I needed to take my integrity. Needed to leave the New York Times and maintain my dignity.
My Jerry Maguire moment.
Okay, self-aggrandizing bullshit aside, let's not reduce the Upper West Side to just Seinfeld territory. It's the site of many other cultural touchdowns, like You've Got Mail, Will and Grace, and that time the night before the Macy's parade when Balloon Spider-Man made an absolute meal out of Uncle Sam's ass. My point is, the Upper West Side is more than just one thing.
After the 150 million takeover, the new vids are at an average of 4K views. Oh, shit. I mean, this one got 9K. Congratulations to Barreled Weiss for this fantastic media enterprise. Not that it matters. Nobody gives a shit about what she has to say about anything. The reason why she was hired, the reason why she was placed on top of the editorial team and it's also precisely the reason why after she fucking left the New York Times, she was still able to launch a media franchise known as the Free Press, which we just looked at, and also simultaneously start an unaccredited institute of higher learning, Austin University. It's because she sucked up the fucking billionaires. That's it. She serves an audience of a select handful of very powerful people. That's it. She doesn't need a real audience because as long as you glaze billionaires, you can guarantee upwards mobility.
Anyway, she quickly launched her own publication, first as a Substack called Common Sense, and later as a full-blown media company, The Free Press. Its first motto was honest news for sane people, which feels scientifically engineered to trigger an eye roll. Here she is, not long after starting it, making her pitch.
I want to create the media company where people can go for the best podcasts, the best reporting, the best analysis, basically combining the blue chip high quality of the old media landscape with the punk energy of the new political realignment.
Okay, first, it is pretty hard to claim you've got punk energy when you essentially spout conservative talking points while dressed like the front desk manager at a Courtyard Marriott. I, for one, do not trust the punk bona fides of anyone wearing an Ann Taylor collarless silk blouse. But it turns out, like most punk rock things, the Free Press was quickly bankrolled by a string of reactionary billionaires like venture capitalist Mark Andreessen and David Sachs. And in the 5 years since, it's grown to roughly 1.5 million readers, although only around 1 in 10 actually pay to subscribe, meaning it generates subscription revenues of about $15 million a year, which isn't nothing, but I would argue, also not quite enough to justify someone spending $150 million to acquire it, as that is a revenues to valuation ratio that would make Mr. Wonderful start vomiting blood. Anyway, Weiss has since stocked the Free Press with staffers who, in some cases, are quick to brag that, like her, they are proud refugees from the mainstream media.
Hey, I'm Lucy. I'm the social media editor here at the Free Press, and today I'm an...
Jewish Bag says, I don't get what's exciting about her. Am I anti-Semitic? I'm sure there's a Free Press article written about exactly that. If you find Barry Weiss to be unimpressive, you are an anti-Semite.
Asked my coworkers the moment they realized they were free pressers. Olivia, when did you realize that you were a free presser?
When I was reporting for on President Trump and they inserted the word racist into the headline.
Okay, so just to be clear, she was apparently reporting for NPR, even though that bleep makes it seem like she used to write for an outlet called the Fuckhole Times or something. and the word racist was the top of...
Wait, why is NPR bleeped? Like, is that like an inside joke that they have or something? Is that like an editorial standard? I unironically thought Austin University was a meme in this community to learn how to be a gay liberal pilot. I am just now learning how wrong I was. Yeah, ironically enough, one of my rage moments came from the 60 Minutes coverage, which now Barry Weiss completely controls, as a matter of fact, on this billionaire-backed institution that is unaccredited.
Story of hers about public response to Trump saying these 4 members of Congress, all American citizens, 3 of whom were born in the US, should go back to the countries they came from. And I guess if you are not ready to call that racist, the Free Press might be the place for you. One of Barry Weiss's go-to lines is that she's only interested in the truth. In announcing her decision to go to CBS this week, she said, America cannot thrive without common facts, common truths, and a common reality, which sounds great. But watch her articulate the free press's approach to arriving at the truth and see if you can spot a small problem with it.
The identity of our brand is truth-seeking, and our premise is you cannot get to truth in an echo chamber. The only way that you get...
I love this, the presentation of like everything that she does, because she's just literally doing what mainstream press does, except maybe like marginally more conservative, while simultaneously abiding by the exact same aesthetic standards of like liberalism and liberal mainstream media resources. That's it. That's it. But she has to present it as like this bold, brave, rational approach that people simply do not want to hear. And in some respects, she's not wrong. People don't want to fucking hear what Barry Weiss has to say. But she's here to say, she's here to stay regardless. It's dog shit. They literally are just like constantly chirping about cancel culture and like institutions of higher learning. They attack all of the enemies of the super wealthy in this country. I don't know. I don't know what to say about it beyond it's something you can get virtually everywhere in mainstream news, including from Barry Weiss back when she was at the New York Times and doing the exact same shit. The notion that this kind of coverage is brave or unheard of in like mainstream liberal resources is so stupid.
To truth is by sitting next to this is what makes it so different from any newsroom I've ever worked in.
Oh my God.
Sitting next to someone
Fucking Andrew
who
Schultz.
disagrees with you, who you still respect, admire them, and collaborate with them.
Yeah. I mean, maybe that is how you do it as an opinion writer, but that is not how you get to truth as a reporter, is it? You do that by leaving the newsroom and reporting. That's like saying the only way to hold Henry Kissinger's skull in your hand is by sitting next to someone who disagrees with you. No, that's not it. You do that by leaving your desk, breaking into Dick Cheney's house, going into his master bathroom and taking it out of its jar. And I'll be honest, there's not a ton of hard journalism on the Free Press sites. There's really not much of anything there. There's usually just a handful of new posts a day, which can even include weird shit like editorial cartoons from David Mamet, the playwright. And if you're thinking, I didn't realise David Mamet could draw, fun fact, he can't. But don't worry, because that hasn't stopped him from producing cartoons like this one that says, what's the best way to deal with detractors? With the answer being a manual for tractors. Or this one, supposedly about environmentalism, that just says shoving eggs up the tushies of chickens. Or this one of an auto...
Okay, I like the art style. I'm not going to lie. I don't know why no, they're not badly drawn. I think these are no, I think this is fine. You guys you have no taste.
A
okay.
biography by Kermit the Frog with a blurb that says riveting, which I'm worried might be too funny. There are also a ton of first-person clickbait essays with titles like, I can explain why the Nazi salute is back, I criticised BLM, then I was fired, I took religion out of Christmas, I regret it, I want people to have more kids, does that make me far right, I was called an inbred swine at Princeton last night, I'm 17 and I'm immunised from woke politics, my family was hunted by Nazis but I was fired for defending Hitler, my husband wants to be cremated, I'd ignore his dying wish, and I used to hate Trump, now I'm a MAGA left. At this point, it feels like we're just 2 weeks away from them posting an article titled, I dressed my dead wife up as Hitler for her funeral, and now her woke family is mad at me. And look, if you go to the homepage of the Free Press, it might not immediately read as a particularly conservative outlet, but once you start reading its articles, the pronounced theme that starts to emerge is the left has gone too far. Basically, whatever issue you feel like that is true for, Israel, campus politics, DEI or police reform, you'll find articles there to reinforce that opinion. And look, I'm not saying the left never got...
Which, by the way, you can never find those exact same articles on any number of different legacy press publications. Never. Famously, the first, 6 to 10 months of Israel's genocide wasn't entirely revolving around college campus politics. Directly funneled through every legacy publisher. Obama said he particularly enjoyed a Marin bit when the comedian jokes that progressives annoyed the average American into fascism. I think this was a fault of some progressive language, was almost asserting a holier-than-thou superiority. Dude, I hate this shit so much. I get annoyed by the woke scolds, okay? I get annoyed by the woke scolds. You don't get to say that, okay? You, as Barack Obama, don't get to say that. The Democratic establishment doesn't get to say that. They are the ones who have used woke scolding as a weapon against their left flank. There are millions of people exactly like me who want to be progressive and are progressive and advocate for progressive values and hate the annoying, smarmy, constant sanitization of like everything that we're saying. And these guys have used that against like the Bernie Bros, for example, to basically carve out. The Radlibs have used identity politics and weaponized identity politics to basically carve out their left flank cynically. And in the process, yes, they have made people really fucking annoyed with them because that's all they stood for. Okay? It's so crazy to me because Obama did this in the election cycle. He literally came out and was like, well, black men seemingly don't want to vote for Kamala Harris because we got a misogyny problem. Like, he literally said that. That was like 3 months ago. What are we talking about? Not 3 months ago. Oh my God. So much time has passed. It's fucking crazy. It was a year ago. I can't believe it's been an exact year, as a matter of fact. Holy fuck, time is not real. Oh. Papa Hasan getting old? Yeah. Yeah.
Goes too far, or that it's immune from criticism at all. But it can sometimes feel like the Free Press's conclusions can get out ahead of its evidence, which brings us to the fact that some of its pieces can be pretty poorly fact-checked and in ways that feel important. And let's look at 3 key examples. First, take one of its biggest splashes. This article, I thought I was saving trans kids, now I'm blowing the whistle. It's an account by Jamie Reed, who'd worked as a caseworker at the Washington University Transgender Center. Her piece claims that the clinic was harming patients by, among other things, routinely approving adolescents for medical transitions without proper mental health assessments, calling its work morally and medically appalling. Now, that story, understandably, got a ton of attention, including from public officials, which prompted Weiss to go on Megyn Kelly's podcast to take something of a victory lap.
The day after the piece published, I've never seen such a sort of rapid reaction to a piece of journalism. Missouri's Attorney General announced an investigation into the gender clinic. The reason that this story was especially important and gratifying for us to have substantiated was because it's exactly the kind of story that we exist to pursue. It's exactly the kind of morally naughty story in which journalists avoid pursuing it because they know they will be punished or smeared for doing so.
Oh my God.
That is why the free press.
Yeah, also, again, hyper niche stories about like medicine for trans people. Once again, the New York Times is bread and fucking butter. I think the most remarkable aspect of Bari Weiss's career is exactly how fucking unremarkable she truly is. Okay? Because every single thing that she is reported on that she considers to be like this incredible, brave piece of journalism, every single thing that she's talking about that you get punished for, like none of those things, and I mean none of those things, are actually punishable in any way, shape, or form in the New York Times or in any of these other liberal fucking outlets.
Exists.
Wow, that is an exceptional amount of self-congratulation, and the bar was already set at the Jerry Maguire moment heard around the world. But she is right. the state AG apparently found that article, to borrow a term, riveting, because they soon announced an investigation into the centre and it ultimately stopped treating minors, with Reed's claims even being used to help justify a statewide ban on gender-affirming care for them. So it did have real impact, which is what makes it so awkward that when Washington University conducted its own investigation, they found that allegations of substandard care causing adverse outcomes for patients at the centre were unsubstantiated. And when other outlets reported the story out again and again, their findings did not match what the Free Press published. For instance, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch found dozens of former patients and parents at the clinic who told them their experiences sharply contradicted the examples supplied by Reed. NBC spent 2 months reaching out to nearly 40 people associated with the centre and got the same result, with patients and parents saying the care they received was thorough and slow. And the Missouri Independent found parents who told them any treatments their kids received were only undertaken after long consultations with doctors and mental health professionals, and often patients were told they needed to wait 4 years. In fact, at worst, follow-up reporting showed that as more patients sought care, the clinic became overwhelmed as its employees grappled with how best to help patients. And to be fair, the Times did find some former patients who had complaints, including one who'd since detransitioned and felt there'd been a major lack of care and consideration from the centre. But even that article, which Weiss claimed vindicated their story, said it's clear the clinic benefited many adolescents, with patients and parents saying their experiences were overwhelmingly positive. And the thing is, some of Reed's marquee examples just don't hold up on further inspection. For instance, she cited the harrowing story of a patient she claimed suffered medication she was prescribed at the centre and whose mother was so distraught, she sent a message saying they were lucky her family was not the type to sue. That sounds pretty striking. But when the Times spoke with that family, they were stunned to read this characterisation of their daughter's case, saying she only experienced liver problems after getting COVID and taking another drug with possible liver side effects. As for threatening a lawsuit, they were adamant that never happened, to the point they went on local news to refute the whole story.
It's not just not true, but it's a lie.
You can't see their faces.
We're in shadow, but we're not hiding.
But you can hear their voices.
There's lies, and people have paid for that in the transgender community.
Did you ever say that you were going to sue the clinic or ever allude to suing the clinic?
No. Nope.
The parent's message goes on to say they don't regret any decision and would never have denied their daughter these life-saving treatments.
We still have no regrets.
It's blatant exploitation of my daughter's medical situation.
Yeah, that mother felt that the story was blatant exploitation of her daughter's medical situation, or as I guess Barry would describe it, harnessing the punk energy of the new political realignment. And look, I get her frustration at seeing misinformation about her daughter go far and wide. In fact, when we reached out to that mother, she told us, "I've been fighting for the truth about that damn Free Press article for a while." And if you're getting the sense that the Free Press isn't about to let whatever fact-checking they do get in the way of a story they want to tell you, that also extends to some of the original reporting they do. Take this piece that they published last year about Austin, claiming crime had soared there under a progressive DA named Jose Garza. It prominently featured a billionaire named Daniel Lebetsky, the founder of Kind Snacks, who'd moved to Austin a few years earlier and was supporting a primary campaign to elect a more moderate DA. The story claimed that Austin's crime wave was leading many of its most buzzed-about new residents, and some of its wealthiest, to worry it might become the next San Francisco. But as local news there pointed out, there was a pretty big hole in that piece's argument.
But this article from a website called The Free Press, one of the first lines, hopefully we can pop it up right here on the screen, one of the first lines of the article claims crimes in Austin has soared under a progressive district attorney. This morning, the numbers tell us that that is just not the case. We looked at crime reporting data from Austin police. So in December of 2020, before Jose Garza took over, 20,500 crimes against people.
No. Are you serious? You mean to tell me that they fucking lied? This is a real shocker, dude. How? What? Come on.
Were committed throughout the entire year. A few years later, in 2023, with Garza
I'm so
as
confused
DA,
by this.
Years, the number was 2,000 fewer than in the same
Not my
time
Barry.
frame.
Yeah, it's true. And it is kind of striking that even local news was like, girl, calm down.
Not my Barry.
Because the only thing they usually love more than overhyping crime is maybe dogs running 5Ks. This just in, woof, woof, pant, pant, good boy goes fast. And finally, There's this piece the Free Press recently posted about media coverage of young people starving in Gaza. It concerned photos that it said had helped convince a growing number of Americans that Israel has induced famine and is committing war crimes in Gaza. There is a lot wrong with this article. For one thing, it questions how starvation and famine have been measured by claiming the IPC, the international body that helps monitor food insecurity and malnutrition, has quietly changed its methodology in Gaza, essentially redefining the criteria for determining a famine. But that is false. Very basically, the IPC has multiple metrics for measuring malnutrition in children. One involves measuring height and weight. Another involves arm circumference. Now, because arm circumference only requires a tape measure, it's far easier to obtain, especially in a place like a war zone. So in Gaza, that is what they started using because of, you know, all of this shit happening. And those methods were not, in fact, quietly introduced, as the Free Press suggested, but have been accepted since 2019 and previously used in famine classifications in South Sudan and Sudan. But it gets even grosser because the piece tries to provide extra context for some pictures of starving children. And here's one of its writers, the one who used to work for the Fuckhole Times, summing her work up.
So you've probably seen these photos of skeletal kids in Gaza on front pages, all over social media.
It's just like when you're in the press, in the comforts of the West, like, how do you get yourself to do this as what you would call news coverage? Like, it is so demonic, bro. It is so demonic. She's another Hasan-obsessed person. I know, all my fucking ops, dude. Except, dude, at this point, I've realized that just everyone is an op. We live under a capitalist organization of the economy. If you consider me to be a threat to any of that, whether a threat to your moral standing and your lack of interest in changing things, or whether you consider me a direct threat to the existing hierarchy, you will, or a threat to your career ambitions in media or in defense of the Democratic Party, it is always going to be, there's always going to be people that will just go, nah, fuck these guys. Fuck this guy, Hasan. I hate him.
Media, even in a UNICEF ad, they've become the symbols of famine. But we decided to look into these photos and the stories behind them. And what we found is that in case after case, these kids were sick, but not just with malnutrition. In every instance, they were suffering with other conditions or illnesses like cystic fibrosis, cerebral palsy.
It's like they thought, bro, Israel thought this was a banger, okay? That was what was so crazy, is that Israel was like, oh, you know how we're going to fucking cook on this article? If we just tell people that we're not just like starving babies, we're starving disabled babies. Like, that's worse. That's a worse argument. Like, you just made yourself look worse. Netanyahu tweeted this video out. I don't know what goes on in someone's mind.
Palsy, and even traumatic head injuries.
Now, their article claims all those kids were already facing grave situations because of their health, irrespective of any third-party action. But a few things. First, the traumatic head injury she mentioned was, as their article points out, caused by an Israeli shell explosion, which feels like a pretty significant third-party action. Second, it's not like the 12 photos they chose to look into are the only ones illustrating stories about famine in Gaza. And as for the notion that this is something that the mainstream media was ignoring, there is a key problem with that claim too. And see if you can spot it as she walks through their in-depth journalistic process.
Yeah.
We did something so...
Yeah, it's the New York Times' coverage. They're using quotes from the New York Times to say that mainstream media, especially the New York Times, is avoiding the reality. This is a classic thing. This is a classic thing that these guys do all the time, where they're like, wow, no one in mainstream news is reporting on this. And it's like, okay, well, you didn't do original reporting. You're just covering it from, like, the quote that you're taking this from is a New York Times article.
Simple. It's shocking that no other journalist bothered to do it. So this is how we figured this out. Let's just take this example of Najwa Hussein Hajj, who appeared in CNN simply as suffering from severe malnutrition in Gaza City. So all we did is we took her name, we went to Google Translate, we took the Arabic spelling of her name, put that into Google, and pulled up a lot of local clips in which her parents were talking about what was really going on. And what we learned is that she has an esophagus condition, which is something that was even reported in English media, including the New York Times. That is a quite different and more nuanced story than the assumption that Israel wants her dead and they're starving her.
Okay, so if no other journalist bothered to do it, but it was even reported in the New York Times, that sure suggests the journalist very much did bother to do it. But also, if we're talking about context, when it comes to the child she mentioned there, they quote...
Well, that was incredible reporting that they did, by the way. Did you guys notice that? They fucking Google translated the name. That was fire. And also, at the end of this tunnel, at the end point of the story, the counter narrative here is Israel isn't just starving children. Israel is starving disabled children as well as non-disabled children, which is fucking insane. You're just admitting that you're an even worse person than we thought you were. What the fuck?
From an Arabic news outlet. Here is the whole section about her from that outlet. Here's the translation, and here's the quote.
Also, that's Euromed, mentioning her. By the way, I'm pretty sure, right? That's the Euromed logo. I think it's Euromed monitor.
Since birth, including vomiting while eating. But it's worth noting, the sentence before says her condition worsens each day without access to protein and vitamin-rich foods that are needed for her treatment. And the line after...
Oh, that's the new Arab? Oh, my bad.
During the Israeli war on the Gaza Strip, her condition deteriorated and she developed malnutrition because the right food for her was simply unavailable. And while I would love to keep splitting hairs on whether a country's starving kids is better or worse if those kids are already sick, let's just table that discussion for when I see you in hell. And that is not the only bit of cherry picking in that piece, which features a lot of young people with, yes, pre-existing conditions or ailments, but which were made significantly worse when they couldn't access food. And to be clear, as the president of Refugees International wrote, people with underlying conditions always suffer first when hunger sets in, adding that vulnerability is not a rebuttal of famine, it is a feature of how famine kills and who it hits first. And it is kind of weird.
Yeah, this was one of the craziest parts about the famine saga. When that was happening and people were like, wow, look at these like malnourished babies. It's like, yeah, they're the ones who don't have the bandwidth. They don't have enough access to sustenance to begin with. They're the first to go. Like famine doesn't instantly hit adults in the same way because adults can make do. They already have some food stocks, you know? Yeah, it is the disabled, the elderly, and the babies that actually don't have enough fat reserves and fucking die faster.
That nobody at the Free Press thought to include that sort of important context, given that they are famously proud of their ability to Google shit. And you should also know that piece circulated far and wide among those seeking to downplay the suffering in Gaza, including Bibi Netanyahu himself, who shared that video on his social media with a caption, "Facts matter," which is terrible for multiple reasons, including if Netanyahu ever shared one of our stories, I think I'd burn this place to the fucking ground. And by the way, any story too. Even if it was the one where I ate the arse of a cake bear that looks like me. If he retweeted that with the comment, "Facts matter," you would never hear from us ever again. And look, everything I've shown you so far should comfortably be enough to make you question the wisdom of putting Barry Weiss in charge of CBS News. But I still haven't even gotten to her weirdest venture, which lays out her priorities and worldview pretty clearly. And that is the fact that Barry Weiss has started her own university. Specifically, she's co-founded the University of Austin in Texas, and it is exactly what you'd expect. Here is one of the school's promo videos.
If you're wondering why the museums you love and the publishing houses you love and the newspapers you used to trust, if you want to understand why they are hollowed out, look at the nucleation point for this, and that is the university. The premise.
I cannot stress this enough. This is such boring ass bullshit that you get non-fucking stop.
Is that America is not only not great, but evil to the core and rotten and need to be torn down. The answer to that is simply no.
Okay, There are so many things wrong with that, from the firm no to a bullshit straw man argument to the claim we all have publishing houses we love that have been hollowed out, to the pretentiousness of the phrase nucleation point, which sounds more like the title of a straight-to-streaming action flop starring Steven Seagal. Now, UATX is currently unaccredited, and while Weiss proudly posted this image of students on the school's first day, I should note that while that building does look impressive, that is because it's the Texas state capitol. The actual school is housed on a couple of floors of a former department store in downtown Austin, which is pretty unusual. You don't generally expect a college to suddenly pop up in an abandoned store like it's a spirit fucking Halloween. But while the school may not have a traditional campus, it does have a white marble bust of Barry Weiss prominently displayed in one of its common areas. It was apparently donated by Joe Lonsdale, the billionaire co-founder of the defense contractor Palantir. He's one of several billionaire donors to the school, along with Daniel Lubetsky, you know, the nut bar billionaire from that Austin crime wave story, and Harlan Crow, famously Clarence Thomas's benefactor. So the school's already got a lot of red flags on it, even before you get to what's being taught in there. Its Substack, because of course it has one, brags that it's a place where students quote Joseph Conrad and Joe Rogan in the same breath. And one of its big selling points is that its students adhere to what's called the Chatham House Rule, which essentially requires all classroom conversations be conducted off the record. And I'll let one of the school's professors explain.
If someone says something unacceptable to people or shocking or problematic, you can't...
By the way, Barry Weiss, this is a good time to mention it, and I don't think John Oliver is going to mention it. But Barry Weiss basically made a living off of trying to get pro-Palestinian campus protesters and pro-Palestinian campus professors fired from their jobs, just like Ben Shapiro. So the idea that she actually wants to foster free debate on an Institute of Higher Learning was already fucking ridiculous. It was ridiculous from the jump. Why wouldn't he mention that? One, a lot of people don't know that. And two, it's usually just like, it's a lot of people just don't know that. Let's just say for the John Oliver team, I'm willing to say that they probably don't know that. But usually people don't talk about it because obviously it's like you're seen as like an anti-Semitism czar when you do stuff like that, and that is a bipartisan position that has broad consensus in all of the institutes of higher learning, mainstream media, and also in Congress. So. Yeah, liberals also like Israel.
Run out and say, Bobby said something racist, or Susie actually is a Zionist. You cannot do this. And what that means is that students don't have to conform. They can actually say what they think.
Oh, that's good. Well, in the spirit of saying what we think, I'll go first. Your vibe is all the way off. You look like Guillermo del Toro if he only directed episodes of Yellowstone. And you enunciate like you're the third Crane brother that Frasier and Niles never talk about. And you can't tell anyone I said that. Chatham House Rule. And if you're wondering what sort of topics might require a rule like that, apparently one of their first offerings were summer classes called The Forbidden Courses, which promised to inquire honestly into today's most vexing questions, which they then illustrated with this photo of an instructor seeming to point out hot-button statements for debate. And if you zoom in, you'll see, there it is, non-black people cannot use the N-word. And suddenly, that Chatham House Rule makes a whole lot of sense, doesn't it? Although, any black college student will tell you, you don't need to set up a whole university to find out which college kids are comfortable using the N-word, when all it takes is a couple of rum and cokes and Lil Wayne to come up on shuffle. Look, it is no mystery what sort of person starts a university like this, but in case there were any doubt at all, just listen to Barry Weiss, not long after the campus protest started over Gaza, spell out as clearly as possible what she wanted to see happen.
Above all, starting today, we need to uproot, root and branch the ideology that has supplanted truth at the core of American higher education. And that ideology goes by the name DEI. Some call it wokeness or anti-racism or progressivism or safetyism or critical social justice or identity Marxism. Whatever term you use, what is clear is that this worldview has gained power in the world in a conceptual instrument called DEI.
Yeah, and that itself is a whole worldview right there. You know this DEI thing that we've been trying?
Why did no one calls it identity Marxism? No, because she doesn't want to say cultural Marxism or the OG term, cultural Bolshevism, okay? Because it's maybe a little too close to the original roots of where it comes from, which is fascism, like anti-Semitic neo-Nazi fascism. Also, once again, all of these motherfuckers that talk about DEI actually want DEI, which was ironically initiated to address the only ever living, breathing form of DEI that ever existed in the way that they present it, which is for white people. Okay? That's it. For white men in particular. That's what the OG DEI was, when no one got a look because only white men were qualified for the job automatically. You were automatically unqualified. So when these guys say DEI, 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 we got to eliminate DEI, what they're saying is we have to go back to only having DEI just for white men and maybe some white women too. They want to forcibly only hire conservative white men. The side of the story with Barry Weiss, of course, is that she may have had a role in the assassination of Refat al-Arer, who is the famous English teacher, Palestinian poet. You know, he made a mockery of all of the Hasbara trolls, and for that, Barry Weiss put a crosshair on both him and his family. And Israel, very shortly after Barry Weiss putting crosshairs on him, actually ended up assassinating him and his family.
Well, we acknowledge not everyone's been getting equal access to opportunity. Let's just roll back the clock on that, shall we? Also, let's be...
Yeah. Rafat in Gaza, I translate 1, 2, 3. If I get killed by Israeli bombs or my family is harmed, I blame Barry Weiss and her likes. Many maniacal Israeli soldiers already bombing Gaza take these lies and smear seriously, and they act upon them. When we get to Gaza, I will personally rape raw dog your old mother. Here's Rafat joking about whether or not an Israeli baby burned alive in an oven was cooked with or without baking powder. Yeah, this was a lie. Okay? This was a lie. And Rafat was making fun of the lie. A baby was found in an oven baked to death by Hamas terrorists. Leading Israeli first responder recounted the RJC gathering last night, which was a lie. And Rafat was making fun of said lie. He was killed for it.
Anti-racist and not think too much about what that might make us. DEI is actually one of her favourite targets. She's also said it's undermining America, is about arrogating power, and that it demonises hard work, merit, family, and the dignity of the individual. And look, it is not new or indeed interesting that a commentator would say that. There are plenty of them out there, and there'll always be an audience for those who want to make that case. And the truth is, we wouldn't even have done this story were it not for the fact that Barry Weiss has just been named editor-in-chief of CBS News. And that feels different, because there are many opinion-heavy outlets out there, from left to right and with low to high editorial standards. This show is, among other things, an opinion outlet. And while our staff works incredibly hard to research stories before we write something and vigorously check our facts afterwards, we're also not the news. And I wouldn't want anyone...
For the record, American Prospect, and even Reason, I would say, does a lot of original reporting, but especially American Prospect, unlike any of these other outlets. The American Prospect is not an editorial, an editorial magazine. And yes, I know David Dane had some words for it. I saw it earlier. I have much to say about Last Week Tonight, lumping us in with National Review and The Federalist and Pod Save and Jacobin as an opinion-heavy outlet. We are a news outlet that, regardless of our perspective, provides fact-based reporting. Putting us on this list is factually inaccurate. Our ratio of reporting to opinion is substantially less than, say, the New York Times. Everyone who has submitted an opinion piece to me, who I unilaterally tell we don't run outside opinion pieces, would know this. I Am John Oliver says that at Last Week Tonight, our staff works incredibly hard to research stories before we write something and vigorously check afterward. On several occasions, that research has led them to me. I've had hours of conversations with Last Week Tonight producers about their stories. Why bother to check your facts with the editor of an opinion-heavy outlet? Because we're not that. We report the news. We tell you who has power and what they're doing with it, and it's bullshit to label us any other way. How many times do I have to catch traditional media outlets using our reporting without credit before we're credited as a news outlet? This feels to me like a error born entirely out of those like media bias reporting charts that some of these guys do look at. They look at like, you know, the media bias reporting charts and go, oh, well, this is a biased outlet according to this media bias reporting chart. So it must not be it must not be like on the ground, straight up news reporting. I don't think this was deliberate. I don't think that he made this, he actively chose to put the American Prospect on there as a opinion editorial outlet. The other places can sometimes do new reporting. Even I have sometimes done new reporting, but that doesn't mean that I am a news reporter. I am a political commentator. The American Prospect, on the other hand, is doing journalism. They do not do a lot of editorial pieces, if at all.
Who led a pure opinion outlet, not even one that I happen to agree with, to suddenly be running CBS News. But it is especially alarming to have someone doing it who has spent years putting out work that, in my opinion, is at best irresponsible and at worst deeply misleading. And look, it is not just about Barry Weiss being at CBS. It's about the fact that CBS is now under the control of someone who thinks that she and her editorial sensibility make her a good fit for the job, and who, incidentally, is reportedly preparing a bid for Warner Brothers Discovery, home of CNN and, HBO, which isn't ideal, although, I've got to say, if what he likes about Barry is that she forces him to have hard conversations that get a bit uncomfortable, maybe he'll like this. But the thing is, it's not just about Ellison either. Again, he's just the latest in a string of billionaires who've taken over our journalistic institutions, from the Washington Post to the LA Times, and started making worrying changes. And whatever complaints I might have had with their coverage before, and I have had plenty, my solution would never have been this. Because when these takeovers get announced, it's easy to think, well, thank goodness there are other outlets that aren't under some billionaire's influence. And that is true, because there is always another one, until there suddenly isn't. And I admit, I don't know what is going to happen next. Maybe Barry Weiss will completely reshape CBS News. Maybe she'll flame out and write another resignation letter heard around the world. But it is worth keeping an eye out for subtle changes there, because while I'm sure many of CBS's good journalists will continue to do great work, if you start seeing people resigning or getting fired, or you start seeing stories that seem off in some way, especially if it involves the left going too far on a topic Barry Weiss cares about, it's worth asking yourself why that might be. Because unfortunately, the much bigger answer might be that a billionaire has chosen to inject contrarian, right-leaning opinion journalism into an American icon. Even if, much like that Thanksgiving Day Spider-Man, it has absolutely no fucking business being there.